out. They're from other countries. They're not all from Gaza. Some of them have diseases, and they're using them and saying these people are starving when they're really not. I don't know. I'm not in the strip. I don't know what's going on. The only people that know what's going on are the people in the strip. I do not trust almost any media outlet whatsoever because like most, if not all, the media within the Gaza Strip, and especially in the war zone areas, are all Muslims, and they are all Arab for the most part because it's the only people that can go in there. It's not a matter of being a racist. It's just that's the only way to be safe. So we can't trust any of the media when Hamas puts out the numbers and so forth. And you see the BBC is one of the biggest voices for the false narratives that are coming out of there. We kind of got to be careful with them, especially. Okay, so that's that topic right there. We want to make sure that we pray for Israel today. Father, we lift up that nation. We pray that, Father, covenant Israel will have wisdom in this hour, Father, as they move forward, Lord, with this battle in Gaza. We thank you, Father, for that opportunity to see your hand move in that nation. In the name of Jesus. Okay, let's get to our topic today, redistricting. This is huge, what's going on here. Little background. If you're watching the redistricting in Texas, what is happening here is that the they want to redistrict these states and carve them out and change the way the demographics are in Texas. And this is becoming a big legal issue. Let me give you a little update as far as what they're doing in Texas. This is from the Will Kane show. He'll give us some insight so that you'll have just a background as far as what's going on in that district there, or at least with the Texas issue. Let me play this.
2024 and help the GOP retain their House majority. It makes areas in the Rio Grande Valley redder, packs Democrat-controlled districts, making them bluer, and creates new Republican-leaning districts elsewhere. So, amidst all the freak out, let's take a look at some of the examples of Democrats gerrymandering. Let's head over to the wall. First up, let's take a look at Maryland. In 2016, Republicans won 37% of statewide votes for the U.S. House in Maryland, but they only got 1 out of 8 seats because of the way the congressional districts are drawn in Maryland. Maryland's not the only one. It also has occurred in California, in Illinois, and across the country. Let's show you exactly, though. Let's scoop in on Maryland, take a look exactly how they drew these districts. I think if you can, I don't know how tightly you can see this or come in on this, but you can see the 3rd Congressional District in Maryland. I mean, it's got lines going every which way. All the way around Annapolis, it's shaped something like, I don't know how to describe that, like a serpent. Or the 4th Congressional District, look at this, winding its way around, trying to get closer to Annapolis. That's the definition of gerrymandering, making geographically odd districts to get the voting base exactly how you want it. By the way, in 2022, it got struck down so bad a court took the map and called it illegal. But this is Illinois. They're also guilty of gerrymandering. Their 2020 map, it drew Dems. It wiped away all 3 toss-up districts in the state and even threw out 1 solid Republican district, giving them almost a net of 4 new seats in Illinois. So why the freak out over the Texas map? Joining me now is Texas Public Policy Foundation Vice President Chuck.
I want to pause there for a second because this is where the hypocrisy is being revealed, and we must be wise to that, and let's pray against the deception of that.
Chuck, it's great to see you. There's a lot of freak out because it's potentially the case that Republicans can pick up 5 seats in the House if Texas is successful in redrawing its map. But has Texas done something different than any of these other states?
No, Texas is not doing anything different at all. And in fact, other states have done mid-decade redistricting. You saw that in Pennsylvania in 2018. Look, this is all about politics. It's all about power. If you look at Texas today and what they propose, once Texas is done, if in fact this gets passed, and that's an open question, by the way, then Texas will still not quite be as gerrymandered as California. So even with all that effort, California still squeezes out more votes per seat than would the proposed Texas seats.
And help me quantify that. Something like 40% of the voting base in California actually is Republican, but some small percentage of House seats from California are Republican.
Yeah, it's about 18%.
So this is very important. He's going to say at 18%. You have 40%. We always think about California being so left leaning. 40% is a large number. And are they being represented? And we'll talk about that in a minute, but that's what the argument is.
And what Governor Gavin Newsom is proposing to do is to overturn the will of the people. There is an quasi-independent redistricting commission that was put in place through a ballot initiative. And what he's proposing is to blow that up, to somehow challenge it. I really think it's just about his presidential campaign aspirations, by the way. I don't think he's going to be able to do it. But he wants to squeeze another 5 seats out of the current majority. The majority is 43 Democrat seats to 9 Republican seats. He wants to, I think, to take that down to 4.
I took a look at the Texas map, and I mean, it does, though, make some geographic sense.
Yeah.
The whole idea of...
And this is very important because what he said there about Newsom and California is amazing, but this is very important because this is the way he's going to talk about how it actually should be done.
Gerrymandering or gerrymandering is that you draw, nonsensical lines to get the outcome that you want. And then once you get into urban areas, it's harder. It gets a little different. But if I took a look at California, I mean, what does that look like?
Yeah, so again, a good question. Usually with the bigger states, you have more real estate that you can work with. California, under the Independent Commission, does try to keep communities of interest together. And interestingly enough, the proposed Texas map would increase the number of majority-minority districts. It would increase the number of Hispanic majority districts, and it would create 2 black majority districts where today there are none.
Well, Chuck DeVore of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Where today is none. Wow, what a difference. That's not being reported at all about that. So I'm sorry. Good point. Second. Want to make sure that we bring that in there. So this is the crazy thing that's happening. First of all, the Democratic states, as they shared, has already done this. It's not unusual. When we talk about representation, the whole Revolutionary War was taxation without representation, right? So the English wanted to rule America, but take our taxes, but they didn't want to represent us. So thus we created a republic. That's why we are who we are as an American nation. And so there we are. This is the statement that minorities are saying, that even Republicans and Democrats are saying, I'm not being represented, but they're defining representation on their own worldview. So if let's say I'm Hispanic, I think if I don't have an Hispanic congressman, I am not being represented. He's the only, or she's the only person that can represent me. But that's not true. Representative is who is over that whole district. I live in District 4. Mike Johnson's my congressman. We have every race in this district: black, white, Hispanic, Asian, et cetera, et cetera. Mike represents all of us. We do have representation. We may not like him. We may think he's biased, but you'd have to prove that. You can't prove that, just because of your opinion. You have to find validated reasons or purpose, things that he's done that has left my family, my race out, whatever you want to say. So we do have representation. So this is going to be the battle that we're going to look at here, and we'll talk about the Supreme Court case that's coming up here. So Zach, if you want to pop in here, let's get this conversation started and talk about where we need to be headed on this issue. But this is where it's a huge battle, and it's based on ideology, and that's what when we see gerrymandering, and we'll get into Louisiana here in a minute. When we see this, they are trying to bend, and the commentator said that, trying to bend the ideology of that state to whoever's in charge. That's why we have talked about that. And Zach spent a lot of time talking to you guys about this when he used to have the show by himself, about how down ballot issues are huge because if you don't deal with the down ballot, if you go all the way down one way, then it affects the whole state. It affects everything that goes on there. Speak into that, Zach.
Yeah, so what we see, and I saw this in North Carolina when I lived there, is the question that comes up, and you see it in a lot of states, Republican states especially, is how can you take the case of North Carolina? How can you have a Republican state Senate and a Republican state House and a Democrat governor? And it gets around to how the districts are laid out, and what it ultimately comes down to. I'm reading this case that's going before the Supreme Court, and I have some dates that we can talk about and kind of focus on that deal with the Supreme Court case. Is the argument of the 14th and 15th Amendment about how supposedly you need to have equal representation for, and this was put in after this Civil War, so that former slaves could get their equal representation. And then the 15th Amendment to make sure you're not drawing lines based upon solely someone's race and skin color, i.e., what Martin Luther spoke about. And so the content of their character, not the color of their skin. So the reality is each state is having their battles out. And in this case that's going before the Supreme Court on Louisiana, the battle is, okay, some people say that the previous maps before were on gerrymandering to prevent a certain minority to have representation, and then now the people who had their representation, or they believe their representation, is taken away, are saying, well, now you did it because of the opposite. And so what needs to happen is some clarity in this for all states. And what's interesting, this is in the case in Texas, is look, as we see here, this kind of lays things out clearly, laying things out so that there are not these wiggled lines everywhere, and it creates a clear boundary. And the Supreme Court's going to be the one to ultimately set this up and deal with this.
And that's what we're going to talk about here. Let me give you the Louisiana case that's coming up before the Supreme Court. Little background. I'll play a video here that'll help explain it all. But here's what happened. There was a push because of the minority districts here, or the minorities in our state felt like they weren't being represented. So there was a bipartisan movement, and Zach's showing the picture of it here. They carved out this district where you see that aqua color there, an unusual, which is part of my community. I stay with Mike Johnson. 1 block away, I would have gone into this district, and I would have had Cleo Fields, an African American rep, who took this district. So they gerrymandered it, this weird district all the way across, and they removed Republican Congressman Graves was his last name. Now it was a bipartisan agreement for this. Governor Landry, our governor, was part of this, and he actually is the one that put this legislation out, and it got approved. Now he had some personal issues with this, and this is just us Louisiana politics. The Graves, the former Republican congressman, supported an opponent of his in the election, and many believe it was part of retribution for him to remove him from office. Okay, that's neither here nor there, but it did happen. Now that district went before the Supreme Court last year and was ruled unconstitutional because it was gerrymandered based on race, and you're not supposed to do that, which it did. But because we had an election coming up and we were within, like, I think 3 months of the election, Supreme Court said you can go ahead and use the district for the 24 election, but we're going to deal with it again. So now it has come, I think it was in April. It came before the Supreme Court again. They heard the arguments, and now we're about to have a ruling on this issue. I think sometime later this month, a ruling on this. Now, it's the 14th and the 15th Amendment issue, but let me play the video so you can get a little background of what it includes and what it's about. This will help you then before we can have some more conversation.
Well, next week, the U.S. Supreme Court will hear arguments in the case of Louisiana versus Calais. This first landmark case will decide if Louisiana's new congressional maps stand in line with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, specifically in Section 2 in regard to no race discrimination. It's a pivotal case that may reshape the role of race in redistricting, with potential national consequences as non-black voters advocate for the removal of the second majority black district map in the Pelican State.
Really, at the base level, this case is an example of plaintiffs trying to strip Black voters of a hard-fought victory in a congressional map that provides them with an equal voice.
A significant case will be brought up to the Supreme Court on March 24th and will determine the future of voting rights in America. According to U.S. Census data from 2020, the state's Black population increased while its white population decreased. Civil rights attorneys, advocates, and community members then urged state lawmakers to make a new map that fully represented Louisiana voters in Congress.
So Louisiana has 6 congressional districts, so Black voters, Black legislators thought it was only fair that 2 or a third of the congressional districts are majority Black as well.
In 2022, the state legislature then created a new map, but was forced to redraw after the map failed to provide fair representation to Black voters in the Pelican State. Finally, in 2024, the legislature did pass a map with a second Black majority district and satisfied Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act.
This is in a bit of a unique situation now because you have both Black voters and Republican state officials defending this map. And now it is up to the Supreme Court to make a decision.
We feel that this satisfies that requirement under the Voting Rights Act and actually provides Black Louisianians the opportunity to elect candidates of their choice at the congressional level in Louisiana.
Shortly thereafter, a group of non-African-American voters led by Philip Calais filed a racial gerrymandering challenge to this new map.
Their claim was that race predominated in the drawing of this new district. We quickly intervened on behalf of those same plaintiffs we had represented in the Robinson litigation to defend the legislature's map, which satisfied Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act.
In May 2024, the Supreme Court granted an emergency stay in the case, which allowed for the 2024 map to be used in the November election. In that election, current Louisiana Congressman Cleo Fields won that election and currently sits in the new Congressional District 6.
It's important to remember that, racial gerrymandering is illegal, but partisan gerrymandering is not. So a big part of the state's case in this redistricting case is that their objectives were political.
All things the Supreme Court will now look into early next week.
It will be a clear rejection of baseless attempts to invalidate VRA compliant districts. And it's an opportunity for the court to reaffirm its precedent and ensure that the voices of Black voters, not only in Louisiana, but really across the country, are not diluted, and reaffirm this country's promise of a fair and democratic system.
The Supreme Court will hear arguments from both.
So that's the kind of the background of everything there. I think it explains it pretty well. I think she made a great point there at the end that racial districting is illegal. Partisan is not, which is, I'm learning a lot about this as I study this. And that's where you're seeing some of this. So here's the case. It's coming before the Supreme Court. It's already been argued, and they're going to rule on this. If they rule, which they've already ruled this district is illegal. They've already said that. But if they come in and say you cannot do this, now we have a domino effect nationwide where you're going to see, let's say they do that and they go and prove in Maryland and they prove in Illinois or New York, wherever, that they did gerrymander based on race. They will have a precedence to go to the court and say that's illegal. You must do away with that district. And you could see this nation turned upside down concerning the redistricting of our state and of our states. And so this is monstrous. It may be one of the most important Supreme Court decisions we've had in many, many years. I'm going to say our lifetime, but it's possible even in a lifetime. Again, I encourage my minority friends in districts where they don't have a minority congressman or senator, mayor, whatever, that you begin to have a relationship with them regardless of their color of their skin. That you begin to say, I'm not going to be against you just because you're not my color or my type, but you represent me. So I want to have a relationship with you regardless. Look, I have lobbied Democratic congressmen and senators. I had a Democratic Senator Landry for many years. I went to her office multiple times a year. I didn't agree with any of her ideology, but I needed to have a relationship with her in order to have a voice into her life. And God used that. And we were able to move her on issues before because we had relationship. So if you're a minority listening to this stream right now, do that. Build relationships. Go that way and begin to say, hey, I want to partner with him, even though they don't meet my ideology.
Yeah, and the big thing, one of the earlier videos you played talked about how California is trying to carve out 4 more congressional seats. This is to ultimately go against and try to fight and claw back the 219 to 212 federal congressional races and the majority there that Speaker Johnson and the Republicans hold. And so if they can carve out, let's say New York or California gets 4 more seats. Let's say they all happen to be Democrat. Well, that's 216 to 219. Then you add in, that happens in Illinois, that happens in New York. They can get above that threshold to where they then can control the House. If it's a Republican president, okay, they can block things. If a Democrat president, they can try to do what the Republicans are trying to do right now and prevent things and push things going in the opposite direction, which is mostly what most people, based upon an equal weights, doesn't want to happen. And so that's kind of where things are headed and why this is headed in this direction. And ultimately, it needs to be the Supreme Court who comes in and says, okay, whether it's racial or political, that needs to be defined. And ultimately, what it's asking for here, in this case in Louisiana, is for the evidence to be shown from either party. Okay, if it is political, prove that it's political. And if you believe that it is race based, then you have to prove that it's
That's
race
right.
based.
That's right.
And so I do want to point this out. There are, if I can share this here, is there are key dates that we need to look at here that will, in this Louisiana case, that I think are key that we can take note of. Let me just show it here. Let me blow this up a little bit. It shows here at the bottom of this article where it's talking about this case. It says Louisiana's in their challenges to that, and the black voters who challenged the 2022 map are to file their brief by August 27th. Because what's happening on this case with the Supreme Court is that on June 27th, you could see it here, the Supreme Court and Justice Clarence Thomas had basically said, we want to rehear this case. There are problems. And ultimately, as we know, we're coming with the midterms. We want to address this. It doesn't look like they'll get it in enough time. So those who are basically for the 2024 map are going to file theirs. Those who are against it are going to file theirs to follow on September 17th. And then ultimately the state and the black voters are then going to file their reply by October 3rd. And then we'll probably have to wait till later in the year
Yeah,
or
because we
early.
start early voting in October, so I can't see them getting it done this year.
So they're going to this may or may not affect most likely won't affect this upcoming midterm election cycle, but it will in the future
Well,
deal.
no, let's take it back. This is 25. I'm thinking, yeah, our election's in 26. It
So
can,
maybe it will. Okay.
yeah,
So,
it is
okay.
right.
So you're right. So if they come out in June,
Right.
so then it'll deal with that. But then that leads to a short turnaround on
Yes.
campaigning, et cetera, stuff
Yes.
like that. So
Yes.
this is going to be chaos. Now you have an issue in the New York case, where New York has a problem where they have to have 2 consecutive cycles for this to get passed through and to be dealt with, and then it goes before the voters in New York. Governor Kathy Hochul knows that they do not have the timeline in order to do this, but she says that they're going to do everything. She's going to explore every option to redraw New York House maps in order to carve out and create a different balance within the U.S. House seats. So you're starting to see these battles play out here. And she even calls it a legal insurrection with what's going on in Texas. And it's like, that's kind of an oxymoron there, because what the Republicans in Texas are doing is legal. And they have every legal right to fine within the state constitution those who leave and don't have a quorum, because this is their responsibility to represent the constituents of their districts. And so this is huge battle. This is one of the ways that, even though Democrats don't have majority quote unquote power at the federal level, this is how they're going to obscure and get away with things. That's why we say, okay, you win, you can't just go to sleep on an election. Okay, Republican presidency, Republican House, Republican Senate. The battle still wages on because they're not going to give up just so easily.
Yeah, and we have a clip here from Governor Hochul when she talks about this. This is wild, what she says here. Let me pull this one up, and we'll listen to her comments about what she's going to do.
while Donald Trump and his co-conspirator, Greg Abbott, erode our democracy and drag us toward authoritarianism. Now, what Texas and Republican states are doing at the direction of Donald Trump, I say is nothing short of a legal insurrection against our capital. Legal meaning they're using the legal process. Does not mean it's legal, and it must be stopped. If Republicans are willing to rewrite these rules to give themselves an advantage, then they're leaving us no choice. We must do the same. There's a phrase, you have to fight fire with fire. That is a true statement of how we're feeling right now. And as I've said, another overused but applicable phrase, all's fair in love and war. That's why I'm exploring with our leaders every option to redraw our state congressional lines as soon as possible. While Donald Trump and his
Here she goes. And, you know, what a hypocrisy it is, because she's already done this. This isn't their first time. New York's done this. California's done this. We showed that first clip earlier. This has already been done. What they're shocked at is that somebody else is doing what they've done. And I think that the question is, and I don't know enough yet, I'm learning about the partisan ability to redistrict. If you look at it in the natural, I don't know how they used to do it when America started. You should subdivide your state based on population, not on race and on partisanship. You should literally, if you have a squared state, you should have 4 blocks. They would have to be odd shaped because it's going to be about population, and make sure that all 4 districts have the same population. That way you're equal when you go to Washington. You have a rep for each of the 4 districts, and they cover the exact same population within their district. That's common sense. That may be crazy, but that's just common sense of what should happen. And where the chips fall as far as minorities, races, partisanship, it matters not. But that's not how they're doing it now. Obviously, we're seeing now you have all these Republicans, these Democrat state reps from Texas who have fled the state so they don't have a quorum in the Texas legislature to vote. I think they have to have, 51 of them left. There's 150 legislatures and 51 of them left, so they don't have a 2/3 quorum. So they're out and they're gone. They've run to Illinois. They've run to New York. They've run to all these other states where they've found sanctuary because of their ideology. Now, Abbott has threatened to remove them from their seats, which supposedly legally they can do. I don't see them doing that, but that's kind of, it's a play. It's a game right now. They can't hide forever. They're going to have to come back and eventually deal with this. So that's kind of where we are in the Texas battle.
They've tried this before and it always fails flat on their face because their constituents call them out and say, hey, get back and deal with this. It's kind of a gone conclusion. But to your point of how it's done historically, when you just do a basic search of when are state maps, district maps redrawn, the basic Google search just says, hey, state maps are typically redrawn every 10 years when you have a census taken. Which gets into whether U.S. citizens or non-U.S. citizens should be allowed to be on a census, which is another key thing. And what it is, the census is taken is to ensure districts are roughly equal in population. So to your point, the 4 squares. And then so now it breaks down from there to make sure that each district has the equal population so that it is equal representation for everybody. Now, how it's redrawn is dependent upon who's in power. All the articles basically that I'm seeing talk about that. And what is usually supposed to be done is, okay, it's done on 2020 and it's supposed to set it for the next decade. So then as everybody moves and changes everything, then it resets everything the next decade. And the issue that comes up in this is the redistricting maps that are done mid-decade. And so this is the problems. This is where problems occur of the mid-decade shifting. And to sit there and say, say New York's cases, well, we've had so many people shift and move out and move around. Well, yeah, we possibly might agree with that, but the law, there has to be a precedent, a law of the land. In reality, this is where the Supreme Court needs to come in and say, okay, are you allowed to do this based upon these rules? What has changed historically based upon the precedent that has been there based upon population? and not for political and or racial gains. And so this is clarity that is needed. And if there's a case that could come before the Supreme Court and deal with this is the one that is believed to be it, from Louisiana. Because I mean, you can see the map that I posted there. It's just ridiculous. I mean, if you look at this small little one that they have here about how cutting it up, and Will Kane, I think, did a great example of there in Maryland. And this is just another example of that's not really a district there. I mean, take Louisiana, you could speak this more than I am, but North Louisiana and South Louisiana and in Mid Louisiana, they're technically like 3 different states because of the cultures and everything, the environments, the economies are completely different. And so that also plays a lot into it as well. And it's supposed to be based on the maps and lines and districts are meant to be drawn upon the population. And so this is something that needs clarity, and then also leads to other questions of, what should be involved in the U.S. Census and et cetera there. So,
And
any
and what
added
we're
thoughts
having a
there?
problem with this district, especially the ones Zach just showed there, because part of it's in our community. Uh, the the congressman lives in Baton Rouge. We're Shreveport. It's a 4 hour drive, 3.5, 4 hour drive up here to us. He's not seen in our district. We don't ever see him up here hardly at all. He mainly stays down there, and that's where we got to have uh, taxation with representation. And so this is what happens when you gerrymander this way. They're going to stay with the main core people that they work with, and then we're going to get left out. And that's what happens with racial discrimination this way as well. When you do a racial district, and it doesn't have to be black, it can be Hispanic, Asian, whatever you want to call it. Okay, what happens to the non African American, the non Hispanic people? Are you being represented? Okay, so I have representative, but he was put there. He's a DEI hire. If you want to, I hate to say that, but really that's what it is. You're wanting diversity, and you're hiring him based on his color of his skin, not on his skill set fully. I mean, he still has to win the election. I'm not here to say he didn't fight for it, but the fact is, you're getting into some real gray areas about whether you have true representation in your district. And I think that's why it's illegal. That's why they made it illegal. But now we're going to get into the partisanship part, which they're saying is not illegal. So this is where it's going to get to be a tough battle. I think what they said also about Texas is that the fact that there's going to be more Hispanic districts and et cetera, and actually going to have better representation. It sounds like they have a pretty balanced bill there, other than, obviously they're going to strengthen some Republican districts. So that's pretty much what's going on. We've got to pray into this court case that the wisdom of the Lord, that they would be able to study the 14th and 15th Amendments, because that's what this applies to, that they would have wisdom in that decision making, because this could change the entire nation. This could really flip the entire nation on many other issues. So we got to pray into this. We got till October 3rd to see the final statement on this issue. But so let's keep pressing it, especially because the arguments are going to be made in August before the court, that there would be real wisdom in the midst of this.
Yeah, I would second that. There needs to be clarity, for both sides. Okay, make your case, and then let the Supreme Court see things where they are. And reality is that the truth would come forward. Is okay if this was made on illegal precedents or illegal information that shouldn't have caused it, whether it be race or skin color. And if it's opposition, what would it be? And then ultimately looking at how the maps were drawn. And this is what the Supreme Court is for. It was okay. There's an issue with the states. This is affecting. This is happening on multiple states. How do we need this? So this is kind of one of those things that's needed to play out, and letting the system that is there before us kind of play itself out, and just pray for clarity for all involved, so that there is righteousness and justice that can be ruled forward in the days ahead, especially when it comes to matters of, in this case, the U.S. House map that will affect the entire nation. That's why this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue, because it's to try to carve out the shift that is heading, America is heading for the voters towards the right there.
Okay, let's pivot here. We'll close with this topic. If you saw this weekend, the Senate went ahead and went into recess without filling the seats, the 61 nominees they're sitting before the Senate. Schumer stalled, began to blackmail the Senate, which is not unusual. It happens many times, but it will share a little clip here from the Oklahoma senator on what happened in the Senate. But so we have 61, especially many of these are district judges, federal judges that we need out there because of these left-leaning judges that keep overruling the Supreme Court. This is another thing that's still going on. The Supreme Court has ruled, and these federal courts are ignoring that. I don't know how they're getting away with it. I don't know the legal ramifications or how you deal with that yet, but this is what's going on, and we need these reps. Now, get this. These 61 nominees all passed through committee on bipartisan voting. So they're not just all Republican votes putting them in. And then Schumer is blackmailing the other senators. If you give it, we're not going to vote with you unless you give us this. And so here's a report on that about what actually they're asking for and what they're using.
Get across the finish line President Trump's nominees for pretty much, bipartisan people?
Yeah, so first of all, we have 61 nominees that have been voted out of the committee to report to the floor that's got bipartisan support. And President Trump was very engaged for 3 days with myself and a few other members negotiating really the hostage release. I hate to say it that way, but that's what it is, because President Trump's the first president in history not to be able to have one single nominee go through by UC, but that's unanimous consent, or by a voice vote. So we're trying to break the logjam, and the price kept going up. We started at $800 million for pet projects for Schumer, and then they kept raising the number to $1.3 billion. And a lot of this had to do with money going to Gaza, which, keep in mind, Hamas hasn't even released the hostages, but yet they're wanting to send more money to Gaza. And then they kept dropping the number of nominees to the point where President Trump late last night just said, go pound sand. We're not doing this anymore. He's not going to hold the American taxpayer hostage for Chuck Schumer's fear to stand up to his base, because that's what it really is about. It's about he can't figure out how to sell this because he's running scared of AOC running against him, who could probably beat him in a Senate race in New York.
Now, hold on a second, because I mean,
now this is very important. So this is the blackmail I was talking about. He kept upping the price here on okay, he's buying votes. I mean, I don't know how better to explain it. I know this is part of the diplomatic policies and so forth, but this is buying votes, and we're not going to do this. And then on top of that, you're asking for money on issues. I know one of them was NIH and some other things that he wanted money on. And these are big issues that President Trump campaigned on that we were going to cut and get rid of. And now he's putting it back in. So this is like the one beautiful bill. Okay, we cut all this out, and Schumer's putting it right back in, which is typical Washington, that we keep going through this quagmire and we never get out of this problem. All right, I'm sorry, I got a little rant there, but let's keep listening.
This is a duly elected president, and his agenda was elected by the American people. So President Trump has an agenda, and he has nominees that he wants to fill those roles to execute that agenda. These people, these 61 people that you're talking about, are all bipartisan, but you just said the price kept going up. I don't understand this, Senator. What do you mean the price kept going? In other words, you have to pay to get President Trump's nominees across and confirmed? I don't get that. What do you mean the price kept going up?
Well, they wanted something in return, and that is negotiating, right? You negotiate a little bit, but they kept changing their price because they never wanted a deal. Now, keep in mind, none of us wanted to work with Biden administration, but we all do feel like that regardless of who the president is, they have the right to put their people in place. And so we held our nose in 2021 and actually struck a deal to be able to allow 44 bipartisan nominees to go through underneath the Biden administration. And which was, unfortunately, we thought we was working like the Senate is supposed to work. What's happened now, their hatred towards President Trump, their fear, literally their fear of their base has allowed them, or has kept them from being able to move forward at all. And so when I say by the price going up, they kept going. You had Elizabeth Warren, you had Brian Schatz, you had Cory Booker demanding them not to work with Republicans at all. Don't work with this president. I mean, my goodness, we saw the rant that Cory Booker had just this week against his own colleagues for working with us on a bipartisan manner. So Schumer kept demanding more. because he knew that he would get to the point where we couldn't accept it. And I'm proud of President Trump. I spoke to him this morning, which, by the way, he's watching your show. And he said, I had to walk away. I didn't have a choice. And I said, sir, I'm proud that you did this because we put them on notice and said, we're not going to play games with you anymore. So now you're forcing us to change Senate rules, which honestly, in the long run, is the best thing.
Now, this is a very interesting point here, because this is where the Democrats have this backfire on them many times when they change the rules.
So as soon as we get back through this, through the August, we're going to be working on rules change. When we get back, we're going to have to implement those rules change. And it's not our fault. People, the Democrats are going to scream saying, we're doing the nuclear option. No, Chuck Schumer and the Democrats did the negotiation, or did the nuclear option, because they have filibustered. We have 131 nominees confirmed. They have filibustered every single one of those except Marco Rubio. And I want to compare the difference between where we're at in 2017 to where we're at today, just because I want to show the leadership and the effectiveness of Leader Thune. In 2017...
And he'll go on and give kudos to what they have done so far. But I think the point is, and like I said, this backfires on the Democrats. These rule changes, they have what we call them poverty mindset, where you live for the moment. You don't think of the ramifications long term. And so some of these rule changes are going to lock them out of what they want to do, like what they're trying to do now and negotiate. And they'll change the rules where too bad, too sad. We're just going to push them through, and you're not going to get anything out of this. And they're going to be upset about it and say that's a nuclear option, like you said. But this is where we're headed right now. And we need these nominees. We need them put in place, especially in the judges. This is such a desperate need out there. And for me, as a minister of the gospel, God loves justice, and he has an abomination for unjust scales. I'm not saying all these people are perfect, but we do know that we have a better chance because they have a little different view. I think more of a biblical worldview, and we have a chance to shift that. So that's a major issue. And when they come back to the Senate, the Democrats will be wise to go ahead and push them, like they said, hold their nose and just push them through and then fight another day.
Yeah, the issue also is the Democrats are saying, well, Trump's not doing an effective job, et cetera, stuff like this. Is like, well, one, to discredit your point, Trump administration would disagree, but then also is like, how can he do an effective job if you're not putting his people in office? And the same could be said for when the Republicans obscured. And this is ultimately the playbook of the left right now, is to obscure and delay. That's all they're trying to do. And this is one of the ways that they can do it. But unfortunately is look, if going back to the Texas case, just come, let's vote. If you can convince said party and get allies, okay. But if not, quoting the famous words of Obama, is elections have consequences, because this is what the American people want. And now you're preventing that from coming forward. And that's kind of ultimately what needs to be called out. And hopefully, even those who are within their districts can see this and kind of call them and say, hey, let's get something done. And kudos to Chuck Schumer for trying to get what he can get, but kudos on Republicans for calling out this blackmail that's being presented, in our opinion, before the American people, to try to get certain things that are within his power that some of the American people do not want to happen.
And to Zach's point about the effectiveness of the Trump administration, I found this on CNN talking about that. It plays right into what they're saying. We'll close with this one.
The Donald Trump administration is arguably the most influential this century, and probably as well dating back a good portion of the last century as well. Love it, like it, lump it. Trump is remaking in the United States of America. Let's talk about tariffs first, right? There's all this talk that Donald Trump always chickens out when it comes to tariffs. No tacos for Trump. The effective tariff rate, get this, it's 18%, the highest since the FDR administration in the 1930s, up from, get this, just 2% last year. From just 2% last year, we're talking about an effective tariff rate level, get this, 9 times as high this year than last year. But it's not just on tariffs, which of course Donald Trump ran on, in which you're seeing a tremendously influential presidency. What about immigration? Of course, Trump ran and has always run on a very hawkish immigration platform. Get this, 2025 net migration in the United States down at least 60% from last year. In fact, we may be heading for the first time in at least 50 years in which we have net negative migration into the United States. And last year, of course, in 2024, the net migration in the U.S. was 2.8 million. This year, we might be talking about negative net migration. My goodness gracious. Now, of course, this is part of a larger story, as I was mentioning. We're talking about immigration, net migration. We're talking about the effective tariff rate. But get this. How is Donald Trump doing it? Well, he is signing a ton of executive orders. Get this, 180, the most in a year since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Oh my goodness, you have to go back to the first half of the 20th century, the last century, and to make a comparison, Joe Biden signed, get this, just 77 during his entire first year, and we're only a little bit in August so far, and Donald Trump making history with 180 executive orders signed so far this year. So that's why I said that in my mind, Donald Trump is the most influential president of this century and probably dating back a good portion of the last century. That is because he is remaking the country in terms of tariffs. He is remaking the country in terms of net migration, and he is remaking the country in terms of how much policy changes he's putting through in executive orders. As I said, it truly is history making. Love it, like it, or lump it. The Donald Trump administration is arguing.
I think he lays it. CNN has allowed him to come on there. I don't know why they're allowing him. That's against everything they believe. But he's made a good point there about that. What I don't like about his statement, 180 executive orders, which I'm glad most of them are excellent executive orders, but they're not law. And that's where like I talked about the Democrats, you may have to pay a price later. The Republicans may have to pay a price later if we don't make these laws fit these executive orders. And that's something we need to pray and see that happens, that some of these, especially that are godly, good policies that we need in our nation, especially when it comes to abortion and other issues, we need those to become law. Mike Johnson and the Speaker and Thune, I should say, in the Senate are doing the best they can to make as many as they can. But 180, that's a lot of different things that have to be put before legislators. And we're hoping they can get that done. You probably have 2 years, one more year, I should say, 1.5 year to 2 years to get this done. So we have a lot of work to get done. Okay, anything else, Zach, you got? Okay. Well, thanks for listening today. I appreciate you joining us. That was a full hour. I wished we could do all that in 30 minutes, but that's just so many topics. You are amazing that you stay with us and follow us through the whole hour, and then also pray with us on these topics. I think it's just a critical moment that we're in. Let's pray for this court case, especially in this hour, and also those nominees. We need those judges in their positions so that we can have a more balanced, judicial branch of our government across the nation. We need to stand with Israel in the midst of this as well. Well, God bless you. We'll be back here again next Monday, same time. We're at 12 Central time, noon every Monday. You can always watch it by replay. Please share this with your friends. If you'd like to sow to the Pipeline Report, you can do that on our website, Christian Citizen Report, as well as our app. And then there's a drop down thing there. You can put Pipeline Report. Helps us keep us on the air here, keeps pushing what we're doing here. We thank you for your giving. May God bless you. And thanks for listening to the Pipeline Report.